welcome to TAL. Before we start the TAL Talks, we have a few posters there that you can see our upcoming things that we have. And for anyone who's married, we're also going to have a workshop called the Empowered Wife, run by a coach. So if anyone wants to do it, then you can go on the website, it's over there. And we're going to start it in June. Doesn't matter where in your married life you are. She's really brilliant, and she very much empowers a wife to empower the home. And we hope that you join us in everything that we do. We also have, as you know, we have also Monday mornings here in TAL, and just follow us over there. There's a lot of things happening for Shavuot, so just make sure that you know what's going on, and that there's a vision that you will be able to join us on whatever we do next. So I'll start talking. My name is Shavuot Will. For everyone who doesn't know me, hello. So, have you ever thought of, are you a builder or a destroyer? Are we as women builders or destroyers? And most of us will say that we're builders, but sometimes without even noticing, we can destroy. We see this example of a woman in the Torah. When Korach comes and he wants to create a rebellion against Moshe Rabbeinu, they got shaved off their heads. They became Kohanim, and everyone became the same. And he went back to his home. He went back to his house, and his wife, instead of, I read something beautiful by Rabbi Tzipora Gottlieb. She said that instead of him going back home and his wife empowering him and telling him, you know, you are a great person, and encourage him, and what he did, she told him, you're nothing. Now you're going to be the same as everyone else. And they put you, and she started putting him down, and he felt like he was a complete failure. And she told him, you're going to sit there doing nothing, right? She encouraged him to rebel against Moshe Rabbeinu. Where did that take him? Nowhere. He got killed, he got swollen by the earth, she got swollen by the earth. All the 250 men that were with him got swollen by the earth. And then on the other hand, you see the wife of On Ben Pelet. When he came home and he told her what was going to happen, she told him, what difference does it make to you, right? If Moshe Rabbeinu is the leader, you're still not going to be anyone. And if Korach is going to be the leader, you're still not going to be any leader. So why do you want to involve yourself in such a thing? When either way you're not gaining from it. So he says, but what am I going to do? I already gave my word. He says, don't worry, I'll take care of it. And she sat, and the Torah also shows you what a generation it was in those times. She sat at the front of her tent, she took off her head covering, and she started brushing her hair. And when the men of Korach came, saw this, they quickly left, right? So the Torah brings us these two women and says, as an example of who can be someone that builds up their husband and who can be someone that puts her husband down. And we see that women are at the front of all major events, right? Even though the Torah always speaks about Yetziat Mitzrayim, about the 600 men that left, about the men that received the Torah, really behind everything it was the women. Our sages always says, Im zela bigla nashim tzadkaniyot, we wouldn't have left Mitzrayim. Right? If it wasn't for the righteous women of Mitzrayim, we wouldn't have left Mitzrayim. And today also, if it's not for the women, the tzadkaniyot of today, Bezrat Hashem, we are the one who are able to bring Mashiach into this world. So we see that without women, right, we can't. It's very difficult to achieve what we want to achieve, and we see it throughout all the parashiyot and all throughout the parashiyot that deal with Yetziat Mitzrayim. We see the Jewish mothers that had a belief in the future, right? And Yocheved and Miriam with their works in their kids. And when we left Egypt, we had a physical freedom, but we haven't reached yet a spiritual freedom. And for that, we had to arrive to Shavuot. Shavuot is where we get spiritual freedom. And we're not free until we receive the Torah. And then he brought me to the point where when we read Megillat Ruth, we're not reading Megillat Boaz, right? We're reading Megillat Ruth. What is Ruth really bringing us here? Why? How is she showing us? How is she showing us that we are builders and not destroyers? And I think behind Ruth is a woman called Naomi, who was her mother-in-law, and she was a mashpia. But she, at the beginning of her life, she didn't use it letova. She was able to be mashpia her husband to not. If you're familiar with the story, then her husband was a very wealthy person, and when the famine came into Israel, he decided to leave because it was too overwhelming for him to get everyone knocking on his door and asking for help. And instead of her stopping him, she went with him because she thought that was the right thing to do. I have to follow my husband. And I read also something very beautiful. They say that her physicality and the money and the fame around her made her forget. She didn't allow her to feel the pain of Am Israel at that time. So she left, and they left to Moab, and her sons married Moabite women, right? And at the end, her husband died, her children died, and he said that she was pregnant at the time that her husband died, and she also lost the baby, and she felt that Hashem was punishing her. But at the same time, she said, now is my time to rectify what I have done wrong, and I have to go to Eretz Israel. I'm yearning for the land of Israel. And Ruth and Orpah joined her, and the whole way she told them, don't follow me, right? The whole way she's discouraging them and telling them in all the things, why do you want to come with us? We're a nation that we're persecuted. We are a nation that we have to keep 613 mitzvot. You have to keep Shabbat. You have to keep the Tehum. Like, she was giving them all these laws, like saying, go away, right? You shouldn't come with me. You shouldn't follow me. But Ruth sensed the Kedusha of Naomi already from her home. She knew who Naomi was. So she didn't needed her to tell her to come. She saw how she was in her own home. She saw how she dealt with it. Everything was Bekedusha. And Ruth told her, I've already given my life to Hashem, so you can't take that away from me. So even if I go back to Moab, I'm still gonna love Hashem. So just let me come with you. So we see from here that Naomi had such strength and such koach. And at the beginning of her journey, she was mashpia lera'a, or she wasn't even mashpia, she didn't even give her opinion, and she went along with it. And when she felt the pain of losing her husband and her kids, and she walked to Eretz Israel, she understood what is it to feel the pain of Am Israel. What is it to feel the pain of everyone around her? And the way that she behaved in her home is what encouraged Ruth to want to be part of the nation of Israel, because she saw she had a lead, she had someone to look up to. So I get Baruch Hashem, we have a beautiful community here in Tal and outside of Tal, and I get a lot of women coming sometimes to me and telling me that they are tired, they have a lot of responsibilities, they're busy with their kids, they're busy with their husbands, they're busy with work, and they say it's very difficult for us to send them to learn Torah, it's very difficult for us to send them to pray, right? It takes away from the time where he needs to help around the house, and I always tell them that when they will understand what Torah is all about, so they will want their husbands to go and learn and to go and daven and to go and pray. And we can see it in Shavuot, right? We can see how the receiving of the Torah is what made us who we are. We are free spiritually just because we have the Torah. And if we didn't have the Torah, we would be no one, right? We would just be people that were free, right? But we wouldn't be people with a purpose. And I always remember the story when we were in Israel and my husband was in Kollel, and his Rebbe told him, you have to be home from 7 o'clock. You can't come back to Kollel for the night seder from 8 till 9:30. You have to be home Shana Rishana. First year of marriage, you have to be home. So he came home and he tells me, I'm finishing Kollel at 7. I said, no, but you told me that you finish at 9:30. I said, no, I'm finishing at 7. I said, well, you can finish at 7, but I am getting my schar until 9:30. Right? We as women, sometimes we can't go and learn the whole night on Shavuot. And we listen to Shiurim, and we get inspired, and we come to the Tal Talks, right? And we get really excited about it, and we come into like sofek, to come as a sponge, to be able to get as much Torah as we can. But we have to realize that all the Torah that the men in our household learn is also ours. And even so, we get even more, because if they went out to speak on the phone, or they went out to smoke, or they went out to have a drink in the time that they were supposed to be learning, we're getting all those hours, right?
When they're standing outside longer.
Yes, when they're standing outside and talking to each other, we get those hours as if they were learning. They're only getting the hours that they actually learn, but we get the hours that we send them to learn. Right? If we look at it in that way, we'll get excited to send them, right? We'll be so happy to send them, so much more that they'll come home fulfilled. They'll come home feeling like, oh, I have achieved something today. You know what? I went and I prayed, and I didn't have to worry that my wife, my mother, my sister, my daughter is gonna call me and bother me in the mirror, because they know that in this time I pray, and in this time I learn. And believe me, it's hard, and it's not easy, and we want them at home the whole time. But if we learn, we appreciate that by them going out and being like Naomi and Ruth, and being like the wife of Unben Peled, not like the wife of Korach, that we will encourage Torah in our own home, and make sure that everyone is around the house and everything is surrounded by Torah, then we are gaining as much Torah as they will be gaining. And we will feel like we have achieved something beyond. So my bracha to you is that B'ezrat Hashem, that this Shavuot will mekabel the Torah b'simcha, that we will be able to appreciate what we have and who we are. And I will always remember Rebbetzin Gottlieb telling us many years ago when she came to London a long time ago, and she said, we women sometimes forget what is the speciality of being a woman. Don't think that you have to be a man for some days of the year or to behave like them. And embrace what a woman has to be, and really take it to another level. So without further ado, what is that? So with Representative Orlando, and thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me, and all of your talk of Nashim Sidkaniot makes me think of all the ladies in the audience to come out in the evening to learn Torah. That's amazing, and all of you are already my heroes, heroines, and some familiar faces from the leadership course, so that's really nice to see. And did I see one more person who I know from the leadership? It's possible. Okay. Do we have anyone who's got a Shavuos name? Anyone with a name? What's Ruti? Oh, amazing. Any more? Anyone else? Anyone have anyone in their family with a Shavuos name? Any Davids? Oh, gorgeous. And my middle name is
Naomi.
And you have a Naomi? That's so nice. My middle name is Naomi, and I was born on the second day Shavuos, although it wasn't Shavuos for us at the time because we were in Israel. So my parents wanted to give me a, sorry?
Our first breast after 4 pills was second day Shavuos.
For the second day Shavuos, that's amazing.
We didn't call him Naomi.
4 days.
We didn't call him Naomi.
So what's in a name? Names are really important because they describe and capture the essence of someone's neshama. highly recommend a book by the Biala Rebbe, which the original is in Hebrew and it's been beautifully translated into English, called In the Merit of Righteous Women, B'Zchus Nashim Tzidkanios, and a stunning essay about Basya, which is another subject for another time. He talks about the significance of names, and he says that your name keeps you anchored, keeps your neshama anchored to its source in Shamayim. And that's why it's so important to hold on to your name, and that's why we really ask a question before we change someone's name or add to their name, and that's why we're told that parents have some level of prophecy when they give a child a name, and everyone's got a story in their family of how it was about to be the bris, and then suddenly they gave a different name, or they were choosing between two names, and suddenly in a moment of clarity one was chosen. And that's really because names are so significant and tell us so much about the person. And in fact, the Biala Rebbe quoted sources that said that if you change someone's name and do it in a wrong way, you could, God forbid, cut off the soul from its source in heaven. So it's a really, really big thing. And the Kotzker Rebbe was known to say that his most difficult rabbinic questions were those pertaining to names and naming children, because it's such a big thing. Megillas Res is a very short sefer. It's only 4 chapters long, and it's very concise, and it's impossible to understand it without the help of our sages, without the help of Chazal. And one way that they construct an entire sub-dialogue for us to help us understand the story is to analyze some of the names of the people in the story. So for the next few minutes together with you, I'd like to explore the meaning of some of the names of the characters featured in the story of Res. Why is it so concise? Firstly, before we get into the names, the Maharal teaches us that there were many prophets in Jewish history. Does anyone know how many? Over 1 million, he says. Over 1 million. And only 55 of them are mentioned in the books of the Torah and of Nach. And the reason, and they're condensed into 24 books, and the reason for this is that only the prophecies and the stories, the biblical stories that are relevant for us today, have been recorded. Everything which happened then was important, and all of the nevuos which came into the world, the people needed to hear. But everything which is written in there contains a message which is directly relevant to me today, here in my life. And that thought is quite anchoring and quite sobering, but it also means that every single letter in this beautiful sefer is something from which I can learn. And Megillas Res is so packed with layers of meaning that you can't learn it without also tapping into the wisdom of our sages and the oral law, the Torah Shebaal Peh, which is one of the reasons that we read Res on Shavuot. It's because the story couldn't have happened without Boaz having good knowledge of the oral law. Because had he not understood the oral tradition, he wouldn't have known that you can marry a woman from Moab, even though you're not allowed to marry a man from Moab. And this whole story hinged on him understanding the Torah Shebaal Peh, the oral law. Before we look at the first name in this sefer, we have to look at when the sefer is set. It says, "Vayhi bimei Shavuot TAL Talks." It was in the days when the judges judged, and there was a famine in the land. We know that Sefer Res comes from the era of the Shoftim, the judges. So we have the time of Moshe Rabbeinu, then they come into the land of Israel and they are led by Yeshua. And then between that time frame and the establishment of the monarchy, we have a phase in history where we have judges who judge the people, and we go through a kind of a depressing cycle of the judges being in power and everyone behaving themselves, and then the people going astray and going after worshipping idols, and then bad stuff happens and enemies attack and famines happen, and then the people do teshuvah, and they come back again. And we go through cycles and cycles of this era of prophets, which spans 350 years. But interestingly, we're not told during which year this takes place. And again, it's because it's not relevant to us. What's relevant to us is the time frame, and it's a time frame of lawlessness. You can understand the verse to mean it was when the people judged their own judges. So they would decide if they liked the ruling or not, right? They would think if we all want to follow him or not. And it was an era without strong leadership. And into this context, we meet the first person in Megillas Rus, and that's Elimelech. So Elimelech is one of the big, what we would call today, askanim, or pillars of the community, a wealthy individual, a learned individual, respected individual. And he gets up when this famine strikes. He gets up and leaves. Why is he called Elimelech? We are told because he would say Elai Tavai Malchus. He knew prophetically that his family tree would lead to the Davidic dynasty, and therefore he perhaps felt complacent in his moral decisions. He felt worried. Our sages tell us that during the time of scarcity, people would come and bang his door down and demand that he empty his storehouses and feed all of the starving mob of people. And he was scared, so he upped and left. His two sons are called Machlon and Kilion. So Machlon could be either translated as something like a profanity, like he did a disservice to the Jewish people and to the Shem Tov, the good name that he should have had. But it also can be from the word mochel, which means to forgive, because ultimately he's after death forgiven in a sense because his lineage is continued through the marriage of his wife to Boaz and the ensuing lineage that comes from there. And Kilion is derived from the Hebrew word for destruction. So off they go and they leave Bethlehem, which is ironically the house of bread, and they go to Moab to live amongst the people who are known for not sharing their bread and their water with the Jewish people during an earlier time in history when they were passing through. And there we'll skip bits of the story because I want to focus on their names, but there Elimelech dies, and his wife is called Naomi. And this means pleasant, because everything about her was pleasant. There's different readings as to whether or not she's blamed and at which point of the story she's blamed, but there are readings that say that she is praised for her loyalty to her husband. And you can see in the Psukim that this isn't her decision to leave. And it says, Vayelech ish me beis lechem, a man goes from beis lechem. Ish always means someone prominent, by the way, but ishto ishnei vanav, and his wife and two sons, meaning he decides to go and they all tag along after him, and they're deliberately separated in the pasuk to show you perhaps that the decision didn't rest well in her heart, but this was her husband and she wanted to be there for him. And pitifully we learn from the Medrash that he loses all that he owns before he dies. Hashem isn't cruel. Hashem didn't just strike him dead. He first tried to wake him up. So he lost everything he owned. He lost his prestige, and eventually he had to be punished by death. And by the time we reach his point of dying, what is he called? What is his name? Vayamas Elimelech ish Naomi. Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, dies. By the time he dies, all he is a husband to Naomi. There is no one else in the world to whom he matters. How sad. A man who could have saved the whole of the Jewish people and brought them through the famine. Our sages tell us he had enough material wealth to sustain the people and to provide moral leadership. How sad. And by the time he dies, he's called a husband of Naomi. And Naomi is praised for her loyalty and for being so pleasant in her deeds. Often, when I learn messages in the Torah, I feel tempted to say, these people are larger than life. To follow a husband who's going to live somewhere in a strange place and do something which I think is wrong, to be such a pleasant person always, maybe this is larger than life stuff that we confine to those days of old. But then always I try and find, always lahavdil, because these are giants we're discussing, but people in our times to whom we can relate, who share this quality and from whom we can learn. And I will share with you a couple of examples that sprang to my mind, and perhaps you have some of your own in your lives. But one person who I thought of was Basia, who was born Herman, who married Rav Scheinberg. The young couple who were originally from America, they went in pre-war Europe from modern day America to learn in the Mir in Eastern Europe. And she writes as a really great book, which we've discussed before, called, I think it's Daughters of Royalty. It's a really, really great book. It gives interviews with all women from pre-war Europe. It was a project that happened, it was a school class, graduating Basic class in the 1980s. They interviewed all these women whilst they were still around to tell their stories. And she describes how when she arrived, she asked if she could go and just freshen up. And so they took her into the garden because there was an outhouse without fresh running water. They had to bring her some water from the well. And there wasn't an actual gas stove. She cooked over, she had to feed bits of wood into the fire. And this was the amazing self-sacrifice. And when I mentioned her as Shir recently, someone in the audience told me that they heard that at her levaya, her husband, the Rosh Hashiva, sang Karma Hashem and the song about Lech Tech Acharai Bamidbar, that you were loyal to me because you followed me out into the desert. Beautiful. Another one which springs to mind, and you can go and daven at her kever, her grave today, is Rebbetzin Sarah Leah Lopian, wife of the famed Rav Elia Lopian. This is was a formidable woman. Back when her husband ran a yeshiva in Kelm, she herself raised 13 children, and she also looked after the 60 yeshiva bachurim, including cooking for them every single day. The family then moved to live in England, where Rav Elia headed up Eitz Chaim Yeshiva in the East End of London, back at the turn of the century when Jewish life was being re-established from Eastern Europe. In England, specifically in certain areas like the East End. And her father, who came from a famous rabbinic line, he was so horrified that she could move to a place like London, which she heard was devoid of Judaism, that her father, who was a famous rabbi, wrote to her saying that she's got rabbinic permission to divorce her husband and bring the children to live in Israel, and he'll support them because she mustn't do this. And of course, she was strong and loyal and brave enough to stand up to even her father, who was a tremendous scholar, and say this is the right thing. And most movingly, in 1930, Rav Elia, who was such a great Rosh Hashiva, began to feel ill. And the Rebbetzin, who'd already raised their kids to pretty much, none of them were married yet, but they were big children now, she prayed to Hashem and she said, Hashem, Rav Elia and I are a team. He has to teach Torah, I'm here to support him and to raise the family. But right now, I think the world needs him more than me, so please take me instead. And he began to recover, and directly proportionate to his recovery, she took ill and then passed away. And he then lived out many more years to teach Torah. She was in her 40s when she died, and she's buried. You can still pray that. They buried her at Edmonton Cemetery. She's been reinterred to Eretz Yisrael, but the land is still considered holy because a righteous person rested there. And you can still pray there, and I've been, and the place feels holy. It's worth a visit. Edmonton is a cemetery, it's a Federation cemetery, Edmonton Cemetery. It's about 45-minute drive away. Amazing tzaddikim buried there. It's really amazing. Okay, that's Sarah Leah Lopian, and that is Naomi. Why is Ris called so? There are 3 reasons why she's called Ris. One is that she ra'asa, she saw Naomi and how pleasant her ways were, and therefore she decided to join the Jewish people. So much interesting discussion amongst the commentators as to What motivated her? Why did she want to do this? Because it was optional and she didn't have to. Why did she do this? And one beautiful way of understanding it is that, was she so attached to Naomi, or was she so attached to the Torah? And the answer is that Naomi was such a living embodiment of Torah, that loving Naomi and loving Torah were one and the same thing. She lived and breathed Torah so much so that just to be around her was to fall in love with Torah, and this is what Ruth wanted to cling to so much. When Boaz gives Ruth some assistance later in Megillas Ruth, he praises her. And he praises her with something really interesting to do with her relationship with Naomi. And he says to her, I've heard about everything that you did for your mother-in-law, and how you after your husband died, you left your father and your mother and your birthland to come to this uncertain future. And the Malbim says, and I must point out, these are the Malbim's words, ladies, and not mine. The Malbim says, when he says, I've heard everything that you did for your mother-in-law, all your loyalty, looking after her, supporting her. The Malbim says, Shezeh moreh al tov midasech. This really shows, this really shows that you have good midas, that I've heard that you were good to your mother-in-law. V'tiv libech, and that you have a good heart. Says the Malbim, famous commentator, lived in the 1800s. Shalarov hakala, because most daughters-in-laws, so nesis chamasa, hate their mothers-in-law. It's especially beautiful that he loved her, but the two of them had such a really, really beautiful bond. I want to finish off with one idea, which again, Boaz, who is known, Oz means strength, and base is two in Gematria, so he had like a double strength. He was a man of strong moral convictions. And he says to Ruth, he says, Yishalem Hashem pa'alech, Hashem should reward your deeds as Otsehi maskarasech shlema, and your payment should be rewarded in full. Me'im Hashem, from Hashem Elokei Yisrael, the God of Israel, asher bas lachsois tachas knafav, because you have come to shelter under his wings. Now, we said at the start that every word in here is packed with a meaning, but the Malbim, in his typical way, notices that actually we've got a bit of repetition going on in the pasuk here. Seemingly, it says Hashem should pay back your good deeds, and you should have full payment for everything that you've done. So why do we say it twice? So the Malbim says, he talks about two kinds of payment for something that someone's done. There's pa'alech and there's maskarasech. And there's two types of workers. There's a one type of worker who is hired for a specific job. So for example, you buy a dress, it's too long, you take it to a tailor, you pay them for a piece of piecework. So you contract them for the one item of work. And then once they do the work, they get their reward, they get the whatever it is you've agreed with them. I think it's like £20 now, like crazy like that for a hem, right? And you give them the money, and is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. And you get the job done, and your contractual relationship ends there. And there's a different kind of more long-term and permanent relationship with an employer, which is where you're an employee, and so you're bound